With me is conservative columnist Stephen Kent. We also have Doug Farrar here, Democratic strategist and former director of public affairs at the Federal Trade Commission. Interesting, of course, to see the vice president out on the campaign trail. But Stephen, just to start in with Indiana and these primaries tonight, what do you make of this push by President Trump against, as we heard there, it seems like these are lawmakers who support the president. Do you think that this is purely this kind of retribution or revenge we've seen from President Trump in other political arenas?
Yeah, well, in the words of Lieutenant Governor Beckwith in the state of Indiana, we don't just want conservatives in the state, we want conservatives who are willing to fight for maintaining Republican majorities in the country. We are in a political knife fight across America right now over redistricting, and a lot of it did start in Indiana with the decline by the state senators there to move forward. And we have seen sort of an escalation and ratcheting up now across the country. I would say this was sort of an error of Trump's own making. I don't think that he should have pushed the ball ever to begin with, but he does have limited power in state elections. We've seen him try to meddle in midterms and special elections and send Elon Musk in past cycles. It does not always work out. However, at the end of the day, he still does have 86% approval with Republican voters, only down from 90% last year. He's still broadly popular. So I do think that these 8 senators in Indiana are going to pay a price of some kind.
Yeah, those popularity numbers not as rosy with Democrats and independents. We'll try to touch on that a little bit later. But Doug, just to bring you in here, do you agree that this is maybe a risky decision by the president to target so many members of his own party there in a state race in Indiana?
Yeah, I think it is. And I mean, President Trump is sort of rounding third here on his political career, right? And he is deeply unpopular. There was a poll that just came out today. He's underwater on every issue. He's pushing for this redistricting against the wishes of many important people in Indiana. The leader of this movement to keep the redistricting from happening is a longtime Indiana state senator. His father was a state senator. His grandfather served there too. So these are some pretty storied political families within Republican politics in Indiana. I think the question is, does Donald Trump still have the juice, right? For about 10 years, he has dominated the Republican Party, completely made all the big calls. He may find out that, given his popularity, he's running out of runway to make these decisions for these state parties.
And I think to your point, just from last year, Republican voters have identified by at least a 10% increase that they are now party-first Republicans. So you saw this in most of the Trump years, that people were shifting to being MAGA-first voters or Trump-first voters. We've seen a 10-point swing back to being GOP voters rather than I am a Trump-first Republican.
Why do you think that is? Is that due to the president's relative lack of popularity? You mentioned he's still strong with Republicans.
I think a lot of Republicans do understand what he said about rounding third, that we are reaching the end of Trump's tenure, and so it's time to start readjusting. The cult of personality is not going to go on forever.
Well, Doug, it's interesting, of course, because, the president might be rounding third to keep our baseball analogy going here, but standing on deck might be J.D. Vance. And we saw, he's speaking there in Iowa, which is a pretty significant state, isn't it, in terms of general overall national politics. Do you think, that the vice president's out there to try to shore up some Republican support, or is he also there maybe because he knows that Iowa is that sort of magic state for presidential candidates?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's clearly thinking about his future. I wonder how effective it'll be, though, because, again, J.D. Vance kind of campaigned as a populist, someone worried about trade, someone who wanted to keep us out of wars. There's a candidate running in Ohio who has those same views, and that's a Democrat, Sherrod Brown, running against a sort of classic pro-business Republican in John Husted. And so I think we're going to see whether or not the popularity of the president or the unpopularity is going to be a huge drag in a state in which Brown already overperformed most other Democrats in the last election despite losing.
How much impact do you think J.D. Vance can have, or the White House could have, on these midterm elections when I think there's a lot of the worry is among Republicans that the party is likely to underperform?
Yeah, I think the key statistic here is that 87% of Democrats in a Harris poll from last week believe that voting in November is extremely important versus only 52% of Republicans. We live in a time of panic politics. If your side is not panicked about the future of the country, you are not likely to participate in the upcoming round of elections. And to Trump's credit, He solved three of the main problems that were driving the last presidential election. The border is all but closed. No, people are not talking about illegal immigration anymore. He aggressively attacked the transgenderism issue, that it was, sort of spread between the health agencies of the federal government, took that issue off the table. He's overseen at least a dramatic drop in crime across the country. But the problem is when you take issues off the table, your voters are kind of like, I don't have as much motivating me in a panic mode.
Well, there's still one issue left, and that's the economy and affordability.
That's the big one.
Doug, about a minute left here. I want to bring you back in on this point too, but a lot of it has to do with the war in Iran. We've seen gas prices going up. That's never a good thing heading into an election. Today, we see Marco Rubio out there saying that essentially this big offensive operation is over. Is there a political calculation in that kind of announcement, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the war's super unpopular. I think there's also a war powers issue. They're running out of time to make the case that the war should continue. Look, the U.S. has just announced it's going to be a taxi service for freight tankers coming through the Strait of Hormuz. For how long and at what cost is kind of unknown. The gas prices are baked in. We're going to see high gas prices go all the way to the end. And even the tax issue, which the president is pinning a lot of his economic messaging on, 6 in 10 Americans believe that he's handling it worse than the Democrats. So I don't see a lot of good news for the president in the upcoming midterms.
Stephen, 20 seconds?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, it all matters on whether or not this military excursion is resolved. The quagmire is the thing that is in everybody's minds right now. And if they actually manage to pull this off, it's going to be a very different conversation when we're getting to September, October.
Stephen, Doug, thank you as always.
Thank you.
Thank you.